showed a decrease for FEMA non-disaster grants. It was a proposed cut of about $646 million, but it didn't clarify what programs you thought that needed to be cut. So I guess I just wanted to ask, is the nonprofit security grant program one that you're considering cutting?
Well, we're having discussions with the White House on grants that will be continued in the future. The president firmly believes that FEMA needs to be eliminated as the way it stands today, that it needs to be reformed, and that states and local governments should do emergency response with the support of the federal government. So he believes it shouldn't be in the long-term recovery, 20 years later, still waiting to make claims to go out. And many of the grant programs within FEMA were moved over into climate change priorities. They were moved over into building bike paths and shade infrastructure and planting trees, when really, if it is a disaster and if we need to mitigate something happening in the future, we should be building better roads and bridges and putting in bigger culverts in areas that need to be addressed, not necessarily planting shade trees in parks with disaster recovery dollars. And that's what people need to remember, is all of these dollars that come from these grants, many times they're pulling out of that disaster recovery fund. So I think this evaluation of every single grant is appropriate. Many of them, after they're evaluated and are found to be appropriate, they're deployed. But that examination is something I take very seriously, that I need to do to make sure it's on task for why that grant was established.
Look, I'll just say point blank, I think the answer should have been a clear no. And I think that there's very strong bipartisanship here in Congress, especially in the Senate, to protect the nonprofit security grant program. It's literally the best tool that people in New Jersey are telling me is needed to be able to counter anti-Semitism. You know, I can't tell you the number of synagogues and temples that are lined up to try to get this type of funding. In fact, you know, given the rise of anti-Semitism that we have in our country right now, you know, we should be surging resources, not cutting. So, you know, I would hope that you'd have a more declarative no in that vein. And because, you know, I'll be honest with you, I've been trying to see if we can dramatically increase funding to the nonprofit security grant program to try to fight this scourge of anti-Semitism. So I guess I just want to ask you, would you be open to supporting an increase in funding to the nonprofit security grant program if I'm able to work with some of my colleagues to be able to do that?
We definitely have seen the value in that program and are willing to discuss this with you. What I would say is that we have to do an evaluation to make sure those dollars are going to the appropriate entities that they were intended. So they have been very important for many different people in different communities, and I recognize that. This evaluation and work with you on how that program can be improved will be very important.
Well, look, I want to engage with you on this further, because when we're hearing this language about abolishing FEMA and whatnot, you know, one of the elements that people have raised most concerns about is what does that mean for the nonprofit security grant program? So I really do urge you to work with me and this committee to have a declarative stance on that, so people, especially those concerned about anti-Semitism, can have clarity on what comes next. You did raise the FEMA Review Council, which you said is going to be meeting for the first time today. I just wanted to see, because we've talked about this before, about what comes next. I wanted to see if you would commit to working with this committee and hearing our perspectives as part of the council's work and giving us an opportunity to engage before the committee concludes their work and finalizes recommendations. Is that something you can commit to?
Yes, absolutely. There are several things that FEMA does that need your input, statutory requirements. This is a reform process that most certainly will include you in this committee.
Yeah, that's something I know we talked about before you were confirmed, and I hope we can follow up on that, because I think it's incredibly important. Everyone here recognizes that reforms are needed.
Right.
But now the question is just how it is situated, and I certainly have some thoughts I want to reflect from the folks in New Jersey. As mentioned earlier, hurricane season is upon us. Do you have a sense of when the White House is going to announce a full nominee for FEMA administrator?
It should be soon, but I'm not going to put a time frame on President Trump and his administration.
You know, again, we want to have confidence that we have the leadership in place to be able to do this. The last thing I'll just say—
We do have a leader in place, and I can connect you with him as well. I'm sure.
Well, I'll make sure we follow up, but it'd be good to have that formal nomination. The last thing, and maybe we'll just do this in a QFR, but there has been reports of cuts to the national database tracking domestic terrorism. DHS cutted the funding. I just wanted to ask, is that correct? And is there any way that you could reconsider that and see if we can make sure we're tracking domestic terrorism rise in the country?
I can follow up with you on that and get you that information.
Okay, thank you, Secretary.
You're almost